covering everything that you need to know in talent experience.
People applying for new positions is like the cherry on top.
With the technology to attract talent.
Recruiters always know their best talent.
The AI just learns to use that information.
Inclusion efforts across the organization.
Tell me what it's like to work for through associate story.
Interviews with leaders in the industry. Talk about what's new in HR tech. What are the hot topics? We're here every week, folks. Weekly look at the latest and greatest topics in HR. Welcome to Talent Experience Live. Super excited to be here. As I like to say, bold statement, I know, but this is the greatest show on the internet. You'll be hard pressed to find a better show on the internet at 12 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. We go live every Thursday, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Be sure to like and subscribe. Join us on the platform of your choice. We always appreciate it when you join. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So I'm super excited for today's episode. I'm joined by Cliff Jurkiewicz. Cliff, welcome to the show. How are you?
Tom.
Cliff is the VP of Global Strategy here at Phenom. I'll ask him in a few minutes what that actually means. We'll kind of get into it and we'll learn what Cliff actually does here. But before we get started, I just want to give you a quick heads up on who we are and what we do. Phenom, TXL is brought to you by Phenom, and Phenom has an amazing talent experience platform. And our platform helps candidates find the right fit faster, helps employees evolve, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. It helps recruiters achieve some of that next level productivity and efficiency, and it helps managers build the best teams fast with data. All of this is powered by super slick artificial intelligence, machine learning. We've been building a network of data for over 10 years, which is incredible. And we'll get into that a little bit today too. So if you're interested in any of this, be sure to head on over to phenom.com. Let us know, hit the button. We love having these conversations. These conversations need to be tailored to you and your specific challenges and organizations. We care about that. So one-on-one conversation is the best way to get started if you're interested. So shout out to everyone in the chat today. I'm here. I'm looking. Let me know who you are, where you're from, what you do. TXL is a great place to connect and network, right? So you're going to be, if you're on LinkedIn, you're going to be with your peers in the chat. And if you're looking for somebody or you're looking for something, it's a great way to start to get to know other folks in the industry and kind of connect and get talking. We'd love it. So let us know in the chat. We always have an icebreaker question. And today in this episode, we're going to be talking a lot about skills. And one of the icebreaker questions that I came up with for today was, what is one skill that you picked up over, let's say, the past year, right? And we know since the pandemic hit, 2 years ago, a lot of folks have picked up new skills. Early on, it was bread baking. Remember a lot of folks were posting their sourdough starters and all those things. So I'm curious to know in the chat. Let me know what is one skill that you picked up on over the past year or so, maybe 2 years. Could be personal, it could be professional. I'll share one. Cliff, you're a fellow musician, so. I learned how to solder because I really wanted to be able to swap my own electric guitar pickups myself without having to go to a tech and have them do it. So it was a quick and easy skill to learn. I thought it was going to be super hard, but it really wasn't that bad. Have you ever done anything like that?
I actually do a lot of that. As you know, Tom, a lot of people here at Phenom know that I'm a pilot in my off hours. And one of the things that pilots typically aren't allowed to do is work on their own plane.
Oh, interesting.
So you have to have a certified mechanic to do most things, but there are some things that you can do. And in a former life, I was a car mechanic when I was much younger. And so I learned in the last year to start doing some of the maintenance that I'm allowed to do. Oh, cool. I start learn to do some of that maintenance with some oversight of my mechanic. And one of them was actually soldering. We had some electrical stuff to do. That was a plethora of these little things that I'm doing. So being able to work on my own plane has been a great thing to learn. And you really learn about how the plane works, which is very important to a pilot. Yeah, I love taking things apart, right? Yep. So, guitars, it was a lot of fun to just see what's under the hood, right? Take it apart and see how everything works. We've got some great comments here. So Sarah joins in saying entrepreneurship. She started her own Etsy shop, which is amazing. Shout out to Sarah. Maggie from Philly here. Not really a skill, but has committed to doing yoga at least once a week. And it has been awesome. Good for the mind, good for the soul. Love it.
Patrizia, tuning in from Medford Lakes, New Jersey. Welcome. Recently mastered using Google Docs, a foreign concept until last December. That is a skill that will take you very far in life, the way that things have been going. So Patrizia, thank you for joining. Keep on letting us know. Let us know in the chat what your top skills have been. And we want to talk about skills today. When we think about the Great Resignation or the Great Attrition, there's 30 different marketing buzzwords that have been associated with that trend, right? HR has really focused on retaining employees, right? And engaging employees and the employee experience. But I've found, and we've had a lot of conversations around this, that there's this undercurrent that is driven by skills, right? And really what's coming in, what's going out, right? And starting to understand that. And we thought that would be such an amazing conversation to have on Town Experience Live. You bring a wealth of knowledge to that conversation. So I think, and again, you've already mentioned a few of your former lives. Cliff, I think you have more former lives than anybody I've met. So I'm almost hesitant to ask you this question, right? But who is Cliff? Who are you? And what do you do here at Phenom?
So I should mentioned already, I head up strategy here at Phenom, which is for me is a title that it's almost like an at-large role at Phenom. I bring a number of experiences. I don't know if they're talents, but they're experiences from these former lives, to bear. I started here at Phenom as head of services when I was employee number 22. And so early stages have been here for a number of years. And you wore a lot of hats, but I ran services. And what I found was I didn't quite have a passion for service that the way that other people did. But I really had a knack for connecting with teams and the client teams, the teams inside of Phenom. And so moving into the strategy really was the focus to help build confidence in what we do, how we build things, and more build confidence in our thought leadership, because our technology is driven from our thought leadership. Sure. And so I connected a lot with our mission to help 1 billion people find the right job. I really take that to heart every day because I truly, truly love what I do more than anything I've ever done in my life. This, Phenom and this role in particular takes advantage of all the things that I'm passionate about. And so if I can help others find that passion and our technology and the way that we approach the problems in this space and how we innovate and think about things, if everyone could feel the way that I feel, I just think people are happier. And when you're happier about the work that you do, that transcends all of the things in your life. And so I really take that to heart and I bring that passion to bear in these conversations. And the one thing I tell every client, and I would say I'm more on the pre-client experience, right? So I'm trying to bring this to bring these folks on board to work with us. Is if we're able to make those connections for them and help them grow their business and help them develop a rhythm in this space, it's almost self-fulfilling once you start getting it going. So telling that story, building confidence, I'm not there to sell. I'm really there to see if we've got a connection, and then we build on that.
Yeah. I always think about, Simon Sinek's Start With Why, and really finding your why. And I was going to ask you, why do you do what you do? But I think you've really already answered that question, summed it up pretty well. And I love this idea of, being on the pre-sales side, but not selling, and I think it's about connecting on that emotional narrative level, and I think that's so amazing that you have an opportunity to do it. And I love that you found it, you found it here at Phenom, and now it's an opportunity for you to take that and help others find it too. Really awesome. So we know that employees out there have not found it, right? And that's part of the reason why we're hearing in the headlines about the Great Resignation, right? And hearing about kind of the Great Attrition, all these different buzzwords that we hear. Employees have left roles in droves. And, I always think about this McKinsey study that came out last fall, where they said, I forget the exact number, X% are leaving without even having an open role in hand, right? And I think that's just such a sign of the times. And unlike anything I've experienced, and I'm curious, if you have any thoughts before we really get into talking about skills and talking about what organizations can do and what they should be looking at, do you have any thoughts? Because I know you've been following this pretty closely. Do you have any thoughts on why now, right? Like, what are the main drivers that you see that are leading employees to have this movement, right? This change?
I think employees now feel empowered to have the conversation. And they're first having the conversation with themselves. Like, do I really connect with the purpose of the organization? Does the organization even have a purpose to connect with? Has that been communicated? Am I able to contribute to it? And so that's what I'm seeing, when I talk to clients, when I talk to employees, just sort of in the ethos of the conversation. That's the first thing that comes to bear is, why am I here?
Sure.
Right? Why, you asked me that question one night at Phenom, and I hope that I communicated a very clear self-purpose, for my passions. And it doesn't matter what role you're in. I mean, my first job, I worked at Taco Bell when I was 15 years old. And I go back to that experience all the time. Yes, so I kind of grew up in the restaurant business, and that was my first official job. Did newspapers when I was like 11. But I go back to that experience and what I learned working there. And the person that I never forget his name. My store manager was Jim Keebler. And he taught me more about business and serving, being a servant leader than any other person up until the point of me coming to Phenom and working with Mahi and Hari and Brad and our leadership here. That lesson served me really, really well. So when people find a purpose and they're learning something and they can engage, they're more apt to feel connected. People don't feel connected to the work that they're doing right now. And that's the biggest problem, is I think employers have done themselves a disservice by not having a purpose and mission, stating that and saying, here's how we'd like you to be a part of it, contribute to it, and help us grow that.
Yeah. I subscribe to this service called Readwise. It's a pretty cool app, right? And it basically syncs with another service called Goodreads, where every book I read, I'm an avid reader, so I read 50, 60 books a year. Every book I read, it goes into this service and it'll pull out quotes. And every day I get an email with 5 random passages, from books that I've read in the past. And this one came up today, right? So I'm going to share it. I'll throw it on the screen here, and I will read it to you. So this is from Daniel Pink's book, Drive, which was written well before the pandemic, right? And he said, the science shows that the secret to high performance isn't our biological drive or our reward and punishment drive, but our third drive, our deep-seated desire to direct our own lives, to extend and expand our abilities, and to make a contribution. And like when I read that this morning, because it showed up in my inbox, I was like, couldn't be any more perfect for the conversation that Cliff and I are going to have. So when I think about, this idea that we have this deep-seated innate drive to want to expand our abilities and grow and evolve and contribute to something then greater than ourselves, make our tiny dent in the universe. It's been there forever. Why do you think now? Like, why do you think, is it the pandemic? Is it because we've gotten a taste of, maybe different working conditions? Is it because our certain employers showed their true colors, and showed really what they cared about? Why do you think the agency is being expressed now for the first time?
I do think COVID was an accelerator.
Sure.
in a lot of ways. We've talked about that in a number of things, but I think we were headed this way no matter what.
Sure.
Like there was an innate, sort of sense of direction that we had, and COVID just accelerated it and compressed the timeline to 18 months versus what was going to happen over the next 5 or 6 years. And it's really driven by experience. So if you look at the experiences that we're having, and I look at the younger generations that's coming into the workforce, and they are demanding to feel connected, to have a sense of purpose. And there's a lot of employers that haven't thought about that deeply enough. How do we make that connection? And so I'm thankful for these young professionals coming into the workplace, sort of demanding that this needs to be an experience. I demand to have an experience in the work that I do, because I'm giving you however much time it is of my day, of my week, of my month, of my year. I want to feel like that is worth my time. And so I do think COVID accelerated that, but it was a combination of, we were already started to see this happen with all of the platforms, especially social media. Social media can be a negative driver. I see it as a very positive driver of of how we share, how we feel. And so that pendulum has swung in sort of one direction, where it was, we literally share every moment of every day.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
I'm baking something right now, I'm going to show
Yes.
you, or this is how I feel about something that's great. I think it's going to start to swing back more to center, which is a more purpose-driven, avenue. I think there's always going to be some level of that. And I think employers need to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
This is what people want. And I'm thankful that that has been brought to bear, because I'm starting to see my generation, which is a little bit older generation, being able to express themselves in a way that they hadn't before.
Right.
Because we didn't have, I don't know that we had the avenue to do it or the power to do it. And so that paradigm has shifted with COVID, where employers are desperately seeking talented people, and talented people are saying, I have a choice now.
Yeah. And work-life balance is almost, it's not a thing of the past, but it's more of a work-life blend, now that so many different things have shifted, since the pandemic. And it's almost like, because there's not a hard cutoff to say that this is my professional life and this is my personal life, if you don't have meaning, if you don't have a meaningful professional life or a meaningful work life, and it's blending with everything else, you're going to be spending a great part of your day without meaning, and I think that's a detriment, to many workers.
You do. And you build a resentment, like you start, and it might not even be the employer's fault, right?
Sure.
And I'm not saying it's the individual's fault either. It's just because there isn't a connection there.
Yeah.
And you may not even recognize that that's the actual problem.
Right. Yep.
And sort of, and maybe transition to what we're talking about today. That's really the goal of creating an employee experience.
Yes.
Right. Is to expose that connection in a way that's not only tangible, it's explainable, it's usable. I know where I am. I know what the purpose is. I know how maybe help me find my purpose. Because you don't have to wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to be this.
Right.
It took me 30 years to figure out what I was good at. And hopefully now we're with technology, we can actually accelerate some of that, to be able to help people find their purpose faster, but also help employers recognize that that purpose is probably the most important thing in the employee-employer relationship. Yeah,
totally. Shout out to Chris. Chris in the chat. He is from Mexico, coming to us from Mexico. Love to see folks from all across the globe tuning into TXL. So thank you, Chris. Originally from New Jersey, after 16 years as a technology teacher, he is committed to building a fully remote career, which is awesome. And we're seeing that transformation happen as well. So, we know that employees have been expressing their agency. We know that organizations and leaders have struggled to meet employees where they are. What are some of the worst or most off-cited, knee-jerk reactions you've seen of ways that leaders try to counter this?
Well, I've seen basically two things. I mean, there's probably more than this, but the first is to what I call legacy thinking, which is, this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
Like it or leave it, your choice. But this is how we're going to do it. And you're either going to join or you're going to leave, or at least, don't be disruptive to the organization, get your work done and go home.
Sure.
Kind of a thing. So you're seeing a lot less of that, but there's still, verticals where that exists. And they're probably the more traditional, old school verticals that have difficulty changing over time, just because they're usually more conservative organizations. Not all conservative organizations, but just what we see. But the second is, I think, a willingness to say, we don't know. Like, this is I've heard that in the last 18 to 24 months. Tell us what's happening. I mean, this is we've had employee experience now as an offering, for more than a few years. But in the last 2 years, there's been an admission in the marketplace by employers to say, okay, let's take a deep breath. Something is wrong here. We're not either attracting or retaining the right talent. What is missing? Tell us what's missing. What do you see in the marketplace? And I think that's the majority of what the conversation we're having. The knee-jerk reaction is, finally, tell us what we're doing wrong.
And that starts with visibility, right? Like, we can't tell you until we can see, what's happening. So why don't you kind of get into where are the gaps, right? Like, when we think about making data-driven decisions, when we think about having an experience that is powered by data, right? Not just a one size fits all experience, because we know that won't work, right? So when we're thinking about what intelligence, what data can we glean from an organization to start to, tip the scales, to start to guide them in a specific direction, to start to make actionable decisions. What is that data? What does it look like? It has to be more than just retention numbers, people in, people out. So what are you seeing, in our space?
So what we will typically start with is we look at the makeup of the organization and who are they attracting in and who is leaving. You can always tell,
sure,
the strength of a company, not by who comes in, but by who's leaving. So we actually look at that, and then where are they going? Where are those people that are leaving going? And we have lots of data that tells us, what is leaving the organization in terms of skills and experience. And certainly a lot of this conversation is going to be around skills.
Sure.
But it's certainly not the only thing. The second is we look at, does the company have a purpose or a mission? That is becoming the most important thing behind skills. Like if there's a stated purpose and a mission that one can build on and promote and have a sense of belonging. We've talked about belonging, diversity, inclusion. Those are all extraordinarily important elements to the health of an organization. And so what does it look like? How are they supporting DE&I and belonging? And what you see in a lot of these organizations is certainly a willingness to do it, but a failure of execution because they're focused more on the metrics of what they're doing versus in that particular case, getting the groups that can best represent those conversations involved in the conversation.
Yeah. And are you, this is a misleading question because I know the answer, but are you contextualizing this based on industry, right? And based on different segments of different markets? Because I'd imagine, what is happening over here, in let's say retail, it might be totally different than what's happening over here in say technology, right? So
it is. And so, and a lot of the clients that we work with are, mixed, environments. So they'll have frontline workers and knowledge workers, and you have to treat them very, very differently. Because frontline worker is somewhat about skills, and certainly the skills that they bring to the table. But for a frontline worker, it's probably more about schedule and availability and, and that work-life balance or the prioritization of work and life, one or the other at any given time. They need a little bit more control over that. The knowledge worker is slightly different because, now you're talking about more of a professional career, building a multitude of skills, how they assemble those skills into a particular role. That both of those elements, the frontline or knowledge worker, have different attributes that we look at that we need to serve. And if we can do that on their level, speaking their language and have that conversation, that from their point of view, how can the employer best serve them, right? And understand what those experiences need to look like. Then, at least you're starting the conversation off on the right foot. Versus just saying, I'm going to look at skills only, for example.
Right. Yeah. I was talking with one of our colleagues, Stefan, about skills, and he made the most not safe for work comparison. So I will spare you all of that. But it was pretty hilarious. I was cracking up. You can private message me on LinkedIn, and perhaps I'll share it with you.
I think I know the same story.
Yeah, you know the same. Yeah. So we'll leave you on the edge there. You can use your imagination to think about what skills is, but basically it's this. It's people have a fuzzy idea of what skills mean to the organization. Everyone's talking about it, right? Skills are a hot topic right now. But do people really know what to talk about there, right? And what to actually look at? And do they even have access to it? And I think that's possibly, part of the challenge is where do you even begin when you know that skills are critical? Not the only thing, as you mentioned, we talked about purpose, belonging, inclusion, connecting with the employee. But, at the end of the day, it is these skills that are going to drive the organization to produce, right? And also to evolve at the organizational level. So where do the leaders start in terms of just inventorying this, right?
Yeah. So this is the biggest challenge, because this is not data that has been collected over decades at any particular employer. We work with a lot of clients, and you look at the data that's been collected, because there wasn't a focus on it. There is some data there, but certainly not enough to draw any, conclusion or inference as to the direction that's going. So you start with the current employee population, and you have to assess what are the skills that population has. So you start at the individual level and you aggregate up from there. And then what you can figure out is, what are the core strengths that this organization actually possesses? Now, it might surprise you to know that most people, whether it's a frontline worker, slightly different than a knowledge worker, but most people possess somewhere between 40 and 100 skills. Yeah. It's a crazy number, right? But most people on a resume CV will probably highlight maybe 15 to 20 tops. Because as human beings, we couldn't possibly know all of the skills. And even if we did, you're not going to put them on paper, because there's no cohesive way to really do that. So this is where technology really helps. Because what we're going to do is we're going to look at this employee population, and we can get down, because, a company like Phenom, we've seen billions of individuals come through our platform, and we've assessed what their skills are. We've looked at millions upon hundreds of millions of jobs, roles. We know what skills are successful in those roles. So we're looking at how those two things match up on a huge scale, on an aggregate scale. But what's important at the individual level is, and this is where it becomes, when I light up talking to a group of employees that use like an employee experience platform like Phenom, we expose to them, like, you actually possess far more talent than you even are able to comprehend. Let me show you what that looks like and why. So this explainable AI becomes really important. Explainable machine learning becomes very important. And then when you take it to the organizational level and you say, here are the top 40 skills that your organization possesses today. It's what's kept you competitive. But then what you were saying was, where are we going? You say, okay, here's what we see in your vertical, or like most companies, they operate in multiple verticals. Here is the aggregate of those verticals of where these skills are going and the new skills that are being formed. And then we look at that gap and say, here's what you possess, the top 20, top 40, top 100 skills in your organization. Here's where your company is going and where the gap is in the skills that are going to get you there. Here's how other companies have achieved that, where they're finding that talent, how they're bringing them in and attracting them to work in the organization to bring those skills. So it is really the use of technology to make this conversation transparent for both parties, the employee and the employer, but the employer looking at it at that level, that layer of intelligence. We talk about this, having that experience, not for experience sake, but at the leadership level, has to have a purpose, has to be driving the data in the organization to say, where I'm at today, where can I take this, and what's happening in the markets that I'm operating? Because that piece of it is really unknown. You talk about workforce planning, doesn't really exist. Like, nobody's really doing my opinion, doing workforce planning very well, because of the data that it takes to do that. But if you start with that employee experience, that conversation of, here's what you possess, here's what the organization possesses, you have somewhere to start growing towards. Yeah. So, having an internal career site, that just randomly has thousands of jobs is no longer enough. That's not going to cut it. Just having, here's your internal hub to access all the jobs. It has to have a purpose, right? And those job recommendations have to be tailored to the individual based on data. It has to be tailored towards where the organization needs to go. And that's where you start to see a talent or an opportunity marketplace really start to have solid footing in helping the organization get there, which I think is amazing. I'd have to imagine too that, and I'm curious to get your take on this, does this also unite talent acquisition teams and talent management teams? Where in the past, I feel like talent acquisition teams, their sole purpose is just to bring them in. And then, when you have your talent management teams, their sole purpose is just to retain them, right? But maybe they're not talking to each other about these data-driven ideas that are going to move the organization as a whole forward. Being able to identify the gaps and then come together at the table and say, we need help filling these gaps. And oh, by the way, we need you to help upskilling, reskilling, redeployment, over here.
to help compensate as well. So what's the relationship like?
Yeah, I think that, it's a conversation. It's almost like the conversation between a recruiter and a hiring manager,
Sure.
right? Data is the thing that is connecting them. Now, it's not meant to replace the human interaction, right? The human interaction is actually the most important part of that relationship, because it's what we do with that data that tells us whether it's working or not. So I think there's been such a wide gap between, I'm gonna, go out into the ecosystem and find a person, find someone with these skills and talent that we need, bring them in, then I'm gonna hand them off.
Sure.
Right. And then I'm never going to see them again as a recruiter. So how do I really know what's working? So this particular technology really is the connection back to the talent acquisition team to say what you're doing is working or not. Like, let's make some adjustments. And it's also telling the talent acquisition team, how to refine what they're looking for, to be more specific. The biggest problem that we see in the marketplace right now is job descriptions. And this isn't a knock on anyone that writes job descriptions. It's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to put on paper everything that you're looking for. And hiring managers typically are very, very busy people, may not have the wherewithal to really focus in on what's important to them. Technology can tell us based on even their slice of the world. I'm a hiring manager in a marketing department. I've got a 30-person team. We can analyze that team and say, here are the skills that are really important. A lot of those hidden skills, but what the most important thing is, skills are ubiquitous, right? They're everywhere, and lots of people possess skills. It's how organizations assemble those skills to help achieve the work that they're doing that's important. That's why this technology is so important in that relation, because it exposes that piece.
Sure.
Here's how you've assembled these 20 to 60 different skills into a role. And here's why it works, or here's why it doesn't, because you're missing some key components. Go find those key components in the marketplace. Have your recruiting team, even your employee experience team, come back and say, let's find someone even within our own organization that possesses this. And automatically you're advancing the organization, because you had that talent inside all along and you just didn't know.
You just didn't know it. You didn't unlock the potential there. If you're just joining us, this is Talent Experience Live. We go live every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. I'm here with Cliff. He is VP of Global Strategy here at Phenom. We're talking all about skills. We're talking all about what organizations can do and what they can leverage technology-wise to start to understand the skill landscape at their organization a little bit better, so they can make some serious data-driven decisions and movement. Justin, we need the Pee-wee's Playhouse button for whenever I use a buzzword. We need like a buzzword button. So it's like, the word of the day, because I'm going to use a buzzword now because I want to introduce a concept that I think a lot of listeners might have heard about, but it's so out there they don't understand it. And that is ontology, right? Skills ontology. Certainly the first time I've heard of a skills ontology, I had to Google it and start to educate myself a little bit. And, how do you frame it? How do you talk about it? So when somebody who is not super educated like myself asks you, Cliff, like, what is a skill ontology and who owns it and where does it live and all the simple questions, what's your 60-second kind of elevator definition of an ontology?
Yeah, an ontology is simply a mapping of the relationship between things, right? So you've got two things, and if it is typing and an admin role, right?
Sure. Yep.
Typing is a skill, but the relationship there between those two things is what an ontology is. It's not just the things, but it's really about the relationship. So we've talked about that today, just in terms of, and I just said it, just how an organization assembles skills. Well, it's the relationship between those skills, like how they use them, how the individual uses them, how the organization exploits them, hopefully in a positive way, exploits them to the benefit of the employee and to the organization. So it is, and the easiest relation, I always talk about food.
Yep.
In terms of when I explain an ontology, it is, cheese is to pizza, it's a topping. That's the relationship, right? But cheese is also a dairy product, right? So it has a relationship to dairy products, right? Dairy products have a relationship to, farmers. And so these ontologies get really, really big. And this is why you need machine learning and AI to help understand them. at the end of the day, an ontology is really just a pattern. That's all it really is. And I'm way oversimplifying it, but we can look at it as a pattern of a person. At Phenom, we call it a talent graph. It's just a different way of saying ontology. And understanding the relationship of how that person, the skills they possess, how they use them, and does that relationship and those skills match what the organization needs?
Yeah, I always think about copywriting, right? There's probably 30 different ways that I can say copywriting, right? And if that's in the job description, but I said it in one of the 30 different ways in my resume, if you're just looking for the exact match, you're never going to get it, right? And we need to go deeper than that. We need to have intelligence that lets us make those relationships and, again, recommend the right path forward, right? Make the right match. I'm going to use another buzzword, and that's transformation, right? And when we think about organizations who are embarking in some type of transformation, and it's incredibly critical now, you're seeing a lot of organizations make pledges, like I'm going to go from fossil fuels to renewable energy by 2025 or 2026, or we're going to move from this technology, which is not great or archaic, to this new technology, which is better for the environment or better for business or anything. They're making these pledges and they have to have a plan to get there, right? And if part of that requires their workforce to really evolve the skill set that they have, right? They might have those 40 to 50 skills, but they need 20 more. How can this technology really be leveraged to empower the organization to get there faster?
Yeah. So a couple things. So we'll get technical for a minute.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I think it's important to understand how you use an ontology, a talent graph, and how it really helps. And we've talked before about just exposing that data, but let's bring it to the intelligence layer. And you're looking at a leader saying, okay, we have this initiative, to do whatever it is, be carbon neutral or whatever they want to do. Looking at your employee base purely from a data standpoint, like what do we possess as an organization? That's the first layer, right? So how many skills we have. The second layer is how many people are learning new skills, and what are those new skills? That's hugely, hugely important to know. And that's a piece of data that, if you look at like a learning management system, will tell you some of it, but if it's not connected back to, your ontology that you've built, you're evolving, then there's going to be a huge gap. So those two things have to be connected. The third is how many of your roles, whether they're open roles or roles to be created in the future, require those sets of skills. So, and that is the relationship to what people are learning, right? So it's a really important building block. So what the organization possesses, what they're learning and what the roles are, and does that match what people are learning? That's what our technology exposes, right? So you can look at, and that's an oversimplified version of it, but it gives managers, leaders, recruiters, talent, specialists, insight into is the audience that they're going after, whether that's the internal employee audience to help promote and reskill, upskill, is that actually going to achieve what the business is doing? So as these businesses are building out these initiatives, they're building out roles to fulfill the promise that's been communicated. We look at that and say, well, here's the skills that you need in order to achieve that. And we're also looking again at the verticals outside of that particular business, say either here's how they've done it or here's how they're going to do it, because we can see this data and bring that back in and say, is that plan actually achievable or not? One of the biggest things that we see, and it relates to DE&I and the initiatives, because DE&I defined in America is different than is defined in, say, South Africa versus the APAC countries versus European countries. But we look at DE&I and say, is the audience, if you want to be more diverse, then we'll just talk about gender neutrality, right? We want to be a more gender neutral organization. We want to represent all the possible genders equally, which is a really great goal to have. Are the skills available in the marketplace possessed by people that will help you achieve that goal?
Sure.
Right. And we can answer that question. When a leader has that data to say, I've created a plan to do X, Y, and Z, and the data in the marketplace says that that's available to me to bring that talent in to be able to achieve that, now you've got the right plan. often what we're seeing is not necessarily the wrong plan, but not enough data to validate that that plan is actually achievable. So we want to bring light to that. And that's what these platforms do. That's what we do in particular, is to bring that more data to a specific strategy to say, is that going to work or not?
And on a personal level, that has to be so empowering to a CHRO, right? Because when we think about talent acquisition and talent retention, maybe 5 years ago, those were very much the focus of the CHRO, but today, that is the focus of a CEO. That is the focus of a CTO, a CFO. I always joke, if you have a senior title, you're invested. You're invested in talent acquisition and, more importantly, talent retention. And to this conversation, to the point of this conversation, skill retention, right? And skill attrition. This is an investment across the whole C-suite. So for a CHRO to be able to bring that to the table, I'd have to imagine their eyes light up when you show them.
They do, because you just mentioned the word, and you said it twice, retention, right? So retention is ultimately the goal, the initial goal that we're going after in the marketplace right now, because people are leaving these organizations because they don't feel the need to be retained.
Sure.
Right. So there's something wrong there. And a lot of this data that we look at will say, do we need to focus retention and upskill or reskill in particular areas? And if we really focus on that, you retain more employees, because you're saying, I'm going to invest time in you, help you reskill or upskill something that's beneficial to you and your profession, as well as the organization. We both win, right? So that's the conversation that we want to bring to the table. But you can't have that conversation if you don't have the data. If I go to Tom and say, Tom, we want to expand marketing and we want to do these things, but in order to do that, we need you to have this particular skill, right? But I don't know what that skill is.
Right. Yeah.
That's a tough conversation to have with somebody, because you might lose them. And Tom's thinking, I want to have that skill, but I don't even know what the organization needs.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're making that connection, and retention really is the name of this technology right now. And eventually it becomes more than that, because then you talk about this employee experience, you talk about career pathing, succession planning, mentoring, alumni, DE&I and belonging these are all things that bind together to tell the employee that we want you here. We're going to support you in these capacities. And in return, we get something.
Yeah.
We get a smarter, more skillful individual, more capable individual to help us grow the organization. So it's an investment on both sides, but without the data, it's hard to know where to make that investment. Do you throw a ton of money, just scattershot it? Or do I tell you, go spend the money right here, and here's the benefit you're going to get, both extrinsic and intrinsic. And that's what this is meant to do.
Yeah. Yeah. We really need that Pee-wee's Playhouse button, because I'm going to throw out another buzzword, unified platform, right? So, again, it feels like a marketing term, but here at Phenom, we're always talking about, TXM. And again, this is not a marketing pitch, but we're always talking about TXM being a unified platform, because in this conversation, I'd have to imagine that one of the biggest barriers to entry, or the thing that could stop this whole movement in its tracks, is disparate systems, right? And you alluded to it earlier. If you have this amazing LXP, learning experience platform, or LMS over here, you have your HCM data over here, you have Phenom over here, and if you're not bringing all the data together, we can't make sense of it, right? Like, we can't see the full picture. So do you run into that a lot, where organizations have created, not intentionally, but have created this Frankenstein monster of systems where data just needs to be brought in?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that, number one, I'm really appreciative in our domain in the last 10 years. So I would like to think that Phenom was a huge catalyst for talking about experience in talent acquisition and talent management, but there are a lot of players now. I think they validate all of us. There are more than a few hundred of us that do what we do in different capacities. There are very few platforms, though, right? And the difference really is being able not only to connect this data stream. So we talk about actually two things quite often: the unification of experience. So if I'm a external candidate, lead applicant, come into an organization, that data can follow me around to the next experience on Phenom. You engage in the employee experience, which is the base level experience, the career path things, succession planning, all the things that we do. So there's a natural progression through these experiences because they're connected, they're unified. The data underlying all that follows it through. And that is really important. And not that point solutions don't work at a point, but getting that data connected holistically becomes quite difficult. And we, often talk about that, that it takes 12 to 16 point solutions to make up what we do on our platform. And that isn't, again, not trying to sell. It's what the organization needs. Do they need that unification of experience, that harmonization of data? That is so important to a growing organization. Data should not be the barrier to the growth. Yeah. Right. It has to be integrated, and it has to tell a harmonized story. Otherwise, you're left, in some cases, you're left worse off, because now something's missing and you have no idea where to find it. And that's the biggest problem that we see when you don't fully integrate the data with the experience across these platforms.
So, in this conversation, we've talked a lot about skills at the enterprise level. We've talked a lot about how leaders can look at retention and skills attrition and start to make data-driven decisions. And we touched on experience. As we start to wrap things up, I want to kind of close out on experience, because I want to get your take on this. Experience, and you've taught this to me, is the commitment, right? Experience is how you show your commitment that you want these employees to continue to grow and evolve at your organization and be connected to the purpose. Knowing what the employee experience landscape looks like today, knowing what some of the innovations that are happening here at Phenom, what is exciting you the most, right? Like when you think about employee experience from the employee's perspective, what about it, when you get the data, when you have the intelligence woven into the platform, what's exciting you the most there?
I think that the end result of all this is that the organization can move a lot faster. When I say move faster, I mean, for the organizations that we work with, we see how quickly they can innovate because they've unlocked something in the organization that they did not have access to before, right? And so if we open this with find the passion in the work that you do. When an employer willingly goes into this not knowing if they're going to be able to help you, and you have to. Sure. Using these technologies is going to open up a conversation. Sometimes that conversation may not benefit the organization, but benefits the individual, right? And for me, when I see that happen, that means that you are really being almost what I talked about, servant leadership, right? You are being a servant leader at that point. And I see this in certain organizations that we work with. They live it and breathe it every day. I'm going to mention one just because I love the organization so much, Southwest Airlines. Yep. One of my favorite cultures and places to work. If I wasn't working at Phenom, I would probably be at Southwest Airlines. Yeah. And there's a lot of other clients, but I use them as an example because, we look at how they have used our technology to further an already great culture. And it's just them saying, no matter who you are and what you do, we're going to help you. And that may not be with Southwest. It may not be with Phenom. Right. But we're going to help unlock your true potential. And wherever that leads, we hope it leads to here if we can support you. But if not, we're going to do something for you that and have the courage to have that conversation. To me, when I see that, we've really done something. Like there's been a total culture shift in an organization because now they are operating selflessly and as a servant to their employees. And that's the way that it should be. And when employees see that, they're actually more apt to stay. Yeah. Right. Maybe I don't quite fit in. Right. It's almost like me here at Phenom. When I was moving out of that service role, we created this role for me just to see if it would work. Yeah. And it's worked out great. And I'm a benefactor of this kind of thinking. Yeah.
We had Jess Elmquist, Phenom CHRO, on about a month ago, and we talked about this. We talked about this shift, this paradigm shift, where previously the employer would say to the employee, "You are here for me," right? And now we're seeing this paradigm shift where it's the opposite, right? The employer has an opportunity to say, "I'm here for you," right? And if I show up for you, you show up for me. And to your point earlier, it's this mutually beneficial cycle, this flywheel that just continues to grow. So Cliff, this has been an amazing conversation. I know we want to make sure this gets out to HR leaders everywhere, right? So if you're a recruiter, a talent marketer, if you're a talent manager, be sure to share this with your team, with your leaders. We want to make sure that they are part of this conversation because we want to hear from them too. If you have leaders out there who are struggling to really decide kind of where to start, maybe they do have those disparate systems and they're not quite sure how to start to untangle the yarn ball, like where do you recommend they start with this whole topic?
Yeah, I think, this is why I love the role that I'm in at Phenom, because I'm not here to sell someone. So
love it.
I would say, give us a call. Like
Sure.
we can, and you can ask for me. There's a couple people on my team that we can also facilitate these conversations. But I like to think of myself as an educator in this space more than anything else. And so if it's not Phenom, dare I say, reach out to a vendor in this space that's doing this work, and ask them, just have a conversation about what's working and what's not working. What are they seeing? What are the most important
Sure.
things? Most of us will have that conversation with no strings attached, because education is a huge part of what we do. It's what I spend most of my day doing. Outside of that, I would look at organizations like, I like SHRM a lot, Society for Human Resources Managers. I like the data that they bring to the table. I actually like Forrester Research a lot for some of the data that they're bringing to the table that's saying, here's where the focus needs to be. So that's where I would start. But the vendors that are doing this, like Phenom and I'll use the word co-opetition from my friends over at Paradox. We're more than willing to have that conversation and let the chips fall where they may in terms of who you want to work with, but very happy to educate, because this is such an important topic that you should not be waiting to have this conversation, because someone in your vertical is already having it, or already implementing, or already making these changes to be able to advance the organization. And there's no reason that you shouldn't at least try to educate yourself.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned at at AI Day was, it's no longer about the war for talent, it's about the race to engage.
Yep.
And that applies so much to employees as much as it does to prospective employees. Yep. So I think it's great. Any final thoughts, right, before we wrap things up? You've been a friend of the show. You've been on previous episodes before, so I have no doubt that you'll be back, right? But any final thoughts for our audience today?
I maybe just one, which is pay attention to what the voice of your employees. They have a lot to say, and they'll tell you what they want if you just listen. And you should do everything in your power to try to meet that, or at least have that conversation, so that you can advance your organization. Too many organizations have not done that in the past, and that conversation is opening up now. You don't need technology to have the conversation. It helps, right? We talk about all the things that it brings, but you should be today reaching out to, even if it's a single employee, saying, what are we doing right for you? Where do you want to go? And how can we help?
Yeah, I love it. And have you found your why, right? And Cliff, you have found your why, no doubt. You found your why, you found your drive. So I'm super excited to always invite you on to share that with us and kind of help educate me and educate the audience, in this topic that is quickly evolving too, right? And the technology is evolving fast, right? So we need to keep up with this stuff. I want to give a shout out to all those who were joining us today in the chat. We have Chris, Carrie, Bambi, Patrizia, Maggie, Sarah. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining. Thanks for your comments. For all those who didn't comment, thank you for your time and attention. If you watch this on a replay, thank you for spending some time with us. We always appreciate it. As I mentioned earlier, we wouldn't do this if it weren't for you showing up. So we show up because you show up. So thank you so much. We will be here next week, every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Shout out to Patry, our producer of the show. She's amazing. She helps us really prepare for shows, connect with guests. If you have any suggestions for future topics, any guests that you'd like to see, reach out to myself or Patry. That'd be amazing. Kristen in the chat shouting out. Hey, Kristen, welcome. Yeah, Patry is in the chat right now on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with her and let her know what you want to hear. Justin Devitt is here in studio. He is manning the board. He's got all these buttons that are lit up, and I have no idea what he's doing over there. He's going to get me a Pee Wee's Playhouse button soon that I'll be able to launch into whenever I use one of those infamous buzzwords. And of course, a special shout out to Cliff. Cliff, thank you so much.
Thank you
It's
so
been
much,
a lot of
Tom.
fun. Always a great conversation. And again, thank you for all the work you do here. Even if we can't quite describe what it is that you do here, we all know what you do here, and it's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
And for all those who joined us, thanks again. Have a fantastic week. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next week.